Chapter 3 of the Last Journals of David Livingstone in Central Africa from 1865 to his death. Volume 1 of 2. 1866 through 1868 by David Livingstone and Horace Waller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. Horrors of the Slave Trader's Track. System of Cultivation. Pottery. Special Exercising. Death of the Last Mule. Rescue of Chiricaloma's Wife. Brutalities of the Slave Drivers. Matarikas. Desperate March to Matakas. Meets Arab Caravans. Dismay of Slavers. Dismissal of Sepoys. Mataka. The Wayan Metropolis. Great Hospitality and Good Feeling. Mataka restores stolen cattle. Life with the chief. Beauty of country and healthiness of climate. The Wayan people and their peculiarities. Regrets at the abandonment of Bishop Mackenzie's plans. 19th June, 1866. We passed a woman tied by the neck to a tree and dead. The people of the country explained that she had been unable to keep up with the other slaves in a gang, and her master had determined that she should not become the property of anyone else if she recovered after resting for a time. I may mention here that we saw others tied up in a similar manner, and one lying in the path shot or stabbed, for she was in a pool of blood. This explanation we got invariably was that the Arab who owned these victims was enraged at losing his money by the slaves becoming unable to march, and vented his spleen by murdering them. But I have nothing more than common report in support of attributing this enormity to the Arabs. 20th June, 1866. Having returned to Mataba, we were told by Kinazombe, the chief, that no one had grain to sell but himself. He had plenty of powder and common cloth from the Arabs, and our only chance with him was parting with our finer cloths and other things that took his fancy. He magnified the scarcity in front in order to induce us to buy all we could from him, but he gave me an ample meal of porridge and guinea fowl before starting. 21st June, 1866. We had difficulties about carriers, but on reaching an island in the Rovuma called Chimiki, we found the people were Makoa and more civil and willing to work than the Wayu. We sent men back to bring up the Havaladar to a very civil headman called Chirikaloma. 22nd June, 1866. A poor little boy with prolapsus Annie was carried yesterday by his mother many a weary mile, lying over her right shoulder, the only position he could find ease in. An infant at the breast occupied the left arm, and on her head were carried 2 baskets. The mother's love was seen in binding up the part when we halted, whilst the coarseness of low civilization was evinced in the laugh with which some black brutes looked at the sufferer. 23rd June, 1866. The country is covered with forest, much more open than further east. We are now some 800 feet above the sea. The people all cultivate maize near the Rovuma, and on islands where moisture helps them, nearly all possess guns, and plenty of powder and fine beads, red ones strung on the hair, and fine blue ones in the rolls on the neck, fitted tightly like soldiers' stocks. The lip ring is universal, teeth filed to points. 24th June, 1866. Immense quantities of wood are cut down, collected in heaps, and burned to manure the land, but this does not prevent the country having an appearance of forest. Divine service at 8:30 a.m., great numbers looking on. They have a clear idea of the Supreme Being, but do not pray to him. Cold south winds prevail, temp 55 degrees. One of the mules is very ill. It was left with the Havaladar when we went back to Nagauzo, and probably remained uncovered at night, for as soon as we saw it, illness was plainly visible. Whenever an animal has been in their power, the sepoys have abused it. It is difficult to feel charitably to fellows whose scheme seems to have been to detach the Nassik boys from me first, then when the animals were all killed, the Johanna men. Afterwards they could rule me as they liked, or go back and leave me to perish. But I shall try to feel as charitably as I can in spite of it all, for the mind has a strong tendency to brood over the ills of travel. I told the Havaladar when I came up to him at Mataba what I had done, and that I was very much displeased with the sepoys for compassing my failure, if not death. An unkind word had never passed my lips to them. To this he could bear testimony. He thought that they would only be a plague and trouble to me, but he would go on and die with me. Stone boiling is unknown in these countries, but ovens are made in ant hills. Holes are dug in the ground for baking the heads of large game, as the zebra, feet of elephants, humps of rhinoceros, and the production of fire by drilling between the palms of the hands is universal. It is quite common to see the sticks so used attached to the clothing or bundles in traveling. They wet the blunt end of the upright stick with the tongue and dip it in the sand to make some particles of silica adhere before inserting it in the horizontal piece. The wood of a certain wild fig tree is esteemed as yielding fire readily. In wet weather, they prefer to carry fire in the dried balls of elephant's dung, which are met with, the males being about 8 inches in diameter and about a foot long. They also employ the stalk of a certain plant which grows on rocky places for the same purpose. We bought a senze, or Alocudatus swindenarius, which had been dried over a slow fire. This custom of drying fish, flesh, and fruits on stages over slow fires is practiced very generally. The use of salt for preservation is unknown. Besides stages for drying, the Makande used them about 6 feet high for sleeping on instead of the damp ground. A fire beneath helps to keep off the mosquitoes, and they are used by day as convenient resting places and for observation. Pottery seems to have been known to the Africans from the remotest times, for fragments are found everywhere, even among the oldest fossil bones in the country. Their pots for cooking, holding water, and beer are made by the women, and the form is preserved by the eye alone, for no sort of machine is ever used. A foundation or bottom is first laid, and a piece of bone or bamboo used to scrape the clay or to smooth over the pieces which are added to increase the roundness. The vessel is then left at night. The next morning a piece is added to the rim. As the air is dry, several rounds may be added, and all is then carefully smoothed off. Afterwards it is thoroughly sun-dried. A light fire of dried cow dung or corn stalks or straw and grass with twigs is made in a hole in the ground for the final baking. Ornaments are made on these pots of black lead, or before being hardened by the sun they are ornamented for a couple or 3 inches near the rim, all the tracery being in imitation of plated basket work. Chirikaloma says that the surname of the Makoa to whom he belongs is Mizrazi. Others have the surname Malola or Malola, Chimposola. All had the half-moon mark when in the southeast, but now they leave it off a good deal and adopt the Wayu marks because of living in their country. They show no indication of being named after beasts and birds. Mizrazi was an ancestor. They all eat clean animals, but refuse the hyena, leopard, or any beast that devours dead men. 25th June, 1866. On leaving Chirikaloma, we came on to Namalo, whose village that morning had been deserted, the people moving off in a body towards the Matoboy country, where food is more abundant. A poor little girl was left in one of the huts from being too weak to walk, probably an orphan. The Arab slave traders flee from the path as soon as they hear of our approach. The Rovuma is from 56 to 80 yards wide here. No food to be had for either love or money. Near many of the villages we observe a wand bent and both ends inserted into the ground. A lot of medicine, usually the bark of trees, is buried beneath it. When sickness is in a village, the men proceed to the spot, wash themselves with the medicine and water, creep through beneath the bough, then bury the medicine and evil influence together. This is also used to keep off evil spirits, wild beasts, and enemies. Chirikaloma told us of a child in his tribe which was deformed from his birth. He had an abortive toe where his knee should have been. Some said to his mother, "Kill him," but she replied, "How can I kill my son?" He grew up and had many fine sons and daughters, but none deformed like himself. This was told in connection with an answer to my question about the treatment of albinos. He said they did not kill them, but they never grew to manhood. On inquiring if he had ever heard of cannibals or people with tails, he replied, "Yes, but we have always understood that these and other monstrosities are met with only among you sea-going people." The other monstrosities he referred to were those who are said to have eyes behind the head as well as in front. I have heard of them before when I was near Angola in the west. The rains are expected here when the Pleiades appear in the east soon after sunset. They go by the same name here as further south, Lemela or the Hoeings. In the route along the Rovuma, we pass among people who are so well supplied with white calico by the slave trade from Kilwa that it is quite a drug in the market. We cannot get food for it. If we held on westwards, we should cross several rivers flowing into the Rovuma from the southward, as the Zandulo, the Sanjezi, the Lokiringo, and then, in going round the north end of Nyassa, we should pass among the Nindi, who now inhabit the parts vacated by the Mazatu, and imitate them in having shields and in marauding. An Arab party went into their country and got out again only by paying a whole bale of calico. It would not be wise in me to venture there at present, but if we return this way, we may. Meanwhile, we shall push on to Mataka, who is only a few days off from the middle of the lake, and has abundance of provisions. 26th June, 1866. My last mule died. In coming along in the morning, we were loudly accosted by a well-dressed woman who had just had a very heavy slave-taming stick put on her neck. She called in such an authoritative tone to us to witness the flagrant injustice of which she was the victim, that all the men stood still and went to hear the case. She was a near relative of Chirikaloma, and was going up the river to her husband when the old man, at whose house she was now a prisoner, caught her, took her servant away from her, and kept her in the degraded state we saw. The withes with which she was bound were green and sappy. The old man said in justification that she was running away from Chirikaloma, and he would be offended with him if he did not secure her. I asked the officious old gentleman in a friendly tone what he expected to receive from Chirikaloma, and he said nothing. Several slaver-looking fellows came about, and I felt sure that the woman had been seized in order to sell her to them, so I gave the captor a cloth to pay to Chirikaloma if he were offended, and told him to say that I, feeling ashamed to see one of his relatives in a slave stick, had released her, and would take her on to her husband. She is evidently a lady among them, having many fine beads, and some strung on elephant's hair. She has a good deal of spirit, too, for on being liberated she went into the old man's house and took her basket and calabash. A virago of a wife shut the door and tried to prevent her, as well as to cut off the beads from her person, but she resisted like a good one, and my men thrust the door open and let her out, but minus her slave. The other wife, for old officious had two, joined her sister in a furious tirade of abuse, the elder holding her sides in regular fishwife fashion till I burst into a laugh, into which the younger wife joined. I explained to the different headmen in front of this village what I had done, and sent messages to Chirikaloma explanatory of my friendly deed to his relative, so that no misconstruction should be put on my act. We passed a slave woman shot or stabbed through the body and lying on the path. A group of men stood about 100 yards off on one side, and another of women on the other side, looking on. They said an Arab who passed early that morning had done it in anger at losing the price he had given for her, because she was unable to walk any longer. 27th June, 1866. Today we came upon a man dead from starvation, as he was very thin. One of our men wandered and found a number of slaves with slave sticks on, abandoned by their master from want of food. They were too weak to be able to speak or say where they had come from. Some were quite young. We crossed the Tulosi, a stream coming from south, about 20 yards wide. At Chenawalas, the people are usually much startled when I explain that the number of slaves we see dead on the road have been killed partly by those who sold them, for I tell them that if they sell their fellows, they are like the man who holds the victim while the Arab performs the murder. Chenjawala blamed Makemba, a chief above him on the Rovuma, for encouraging the slave trade. I told him I had traveled so much among them that I knew all the excuses they could make. Each headman blamed someone else. "It would be better if you kept your people and cultivated more largely," said I. "Oh, Makemba sends his men and robs our gardens after we have cultivated," was the reply. One man said that the Arabs who come and tempt them with fine clothes are the cause of their selling. This was childish, so I told them that they would very soon have none to sell. Their country was becoming jungle, and all their people who did not die in the road would be making gardens for Arabs at Kilwa and elsewhere. 28th June, 1866. When we got about an hour from Chenjawalas, we came to a party in the act of marauding. The owners of the gardens made off for the other side of the river, and waved to us to go against the people of Makemba, But we stood on a knoll with all our goods on the ground and waited to see how matters would turn out. 2 of the marauders came to us and said they had captured 5 people. I suppose they took us for Arabs, as they addressed Musa. Then they took some green maize, and so did some of my people, believing that, as all was going, they who were really starving might as well have a share. I went on a little way with the 2 marauders, and by the footprints thought the whole party might amount to 4 or 5 with guns. The gardens and huts were all deserted. A poor woman was sitting, cooking green maize, and one of the men ordered her to follow him. I said to him, "Let her alone, she is dying." "Yes," said he, "of hunger," and went on without her. We passed village after village and gardens all deserted. We were now between 2 contending parties. We slept at one garden, and as we were told by Chenjawala's people to take what we liked, and my men had no food, we gleaned what Congo beans, bean leaves, and sorghum stalks we could. Poor fare enough, but all we could get. 29th June, 1866. We came unto Makemba's brother, Kimseya, who gave us food at once. The country is now covered with deeper soil, and many large acacia trees grow in the rich loam. The holms are too large, and many islands afford convenient maize grounds. One of the Nassik lads came up and reported his bundle, containing 240 yards of calico, had been stolen. He went aside, leaving it on the path, probably fell asleep, and it was gone when he came back. I cannot impress either on them or the sepoys that it is wrong to sleep on the march. Akosa Kone, whom we had liberated, now arrived at the residence of her husband, who was another brother of Makemba. She behaved like a lady all through, sleeping at a fire apart from the men. The ladies of the different villages we passed condoled with her, and she related to them the indignity that had been done to her. Besides this, she did us many services. She bought food for us, because having a good address, we saw that she could get double what any of our men could purchase for the same cloth. She spoke up for us when any injustice was attempted, and when we were in want of carriers, volunteered to carry a bag of beads on her head. On arriving at Makemba's brother, Kimseya, she introduced me to him, and got him to be liberal to us in food on account of the service we had rendered to her. She took leave of us all with many expressions of thankfulness, and we were glad that we had not mistaken her position or lavished kindness on the undeserving. One Johanna man was caught stealing maize, then another, after I had paid for the first. I sent a request to the chief to not make much of a grievance about it, as I was very much ashamed at my men stealing. He replied that he had liked me from the first, and I was not to fear, as whatever service he could do he would most willingly, in order to save me pain and trouble. A sepoy now came up, having given his musket to a man to carry, who therefore demanded payment. As it had become a regular nuisance for the sepoys to employ people to carry for them, telling them that I would pay, I demanded why he had promised in my name. "Oh, it was but a little way he carried the musket," said he. Kimseya warned us the next morning, 30th June, against allowing anyone to straggle or steal in front, for stabbing and plundering were the rule. The same sepoy who had employed a man to carry his musket now came forward, with his eyes fixed and shaking all over. This, I was to understand, meant extreme weakness, but I had accidentally noticed him walking quite smartly before this exhibition, so I ordered him to keep close to the donkey that carried the Haveladar's luggage, and on no account to remain behind the party. He told the Havildar that he would sit down only for a little while, and I suppose fell asleep, for he came up to us in the evening as naked as a robin. I saw another person bound to a tree and dead, a sad sight to see, whoever was the perpetrator. So many slave sticks lie along our path that I suspect the people hereabout make a practice of liberating what slaves they can find abandoned on the march to sell them again. A large quantity of maize is cultivated at Chimsaka's, at whose place we this day arrived. We got a supply, but being among thieves, we thought it advisable to move on to the next place, Matarika's. When starting, we found that fork, kettle, pot, and shot pouch had been taken. The thieves, I observed, kept up a succession of jokes with Chuma and Witakani, and when the latter was enjoying them, gaping to the sky, they were busy putting the things of which he had charge under their cloths. I spoke to the chief, and he got the 3 first articles back for me. A great deal, if not all, the lawlessness of this quarter is the result of the slave trade, for the Arabs buy whoever is brought to them, and in a country covered with forest as this is, kidnapping can be prosecuted with great ease. Elsewhere the people are honest and have a regard for justice. 1st July, 1866. As we approach Matarika's place, The country becomes more mountainous, and the land sloping for a mile down to the south bank of the Rovuma supports a large population. Some were making new gardens by cutting down trees and piling the branches for burning. Others had stored up large quantities of grain and were moving it to a new locality, but they were all so well supplied with calico, Americano, that they would not look at ours. The market was, in fact, gutted by slavers from the Kilwa. On asking why people were seen tied to trees to die as we had seen them, they gave us the usual answer, that the Arabs tie them thus and leave them to perish, because they are vexed when the slaves can walk no further, that they have lost their money by them. The path is almost strewed with slave sticks, and though the people deny it, I suspect they make a practice of following slave caravans and cutting off the sticks from those who fall out in the march, and thus stealing them. By selling them again, they get the quantities of cloth we see. Some ask for gaudy prints, of which we had none, because we knew that the general taste of Africans of the interior is for strength rather than show in what they buy. Rovuma here is about 100 yards broad and still keeps up its character of a rapid stream with sandy banks and islands. The latter are generally occupied as being defensible when the river is in flood. 2nd July, 1866. We rested at Matarika's old place, and though we had to pay dearly with our best tablecloths for it, we got as much as made one meal a day. At the same dear rate, we could give occasionally only 2 ears of maize to each man. And if the sepoys got their comrades' corn into their hands, they eat it without shame. We had to bear a vast amount of staring, for the people who are Wayao have a great deal of curiosity and are occasionally rather rude. They have all heard of our wish to stop the slave trade, and are rather taken aback when told that by selling they are part guilty of the morality of which we had been unwilling spectators. Some were dumbfounded when shown that in the eye of their Maker they are parties to the destruction of human life which accompanies this traffic both by sea and land. If they did not sell, the Arabs would not come to buy. Chuma and Wakatani render what is said very eloquently in Chiao, most of the people being of their tribe, with only a sprinkling of slaves. Kimsea, Kimsaka, Matarika, Matende, Mekangela, Mataka, and all the chiefs and people in our route to the lake are Wayu or Wayu. On the southern slope down to the river, there are many oozing springs and damp spots where rice has been sown and reaped. The adjacent land has yielded large crops of sorghum, Congo beans, and pumpkins. Successive crowds of people came to gaze. My appearance and acts often cause a burst of laughter. Suddenly standing up produces a flight of women and children. To prevent peeping into the hut which I occupy, and making the place quite dark, I do my riding in the veranda. Chitane, the poodle dog, the buffalo calf, and our only remaining donkey are greeted with the same amount of curiosity and laughter, exciting comment as myself. Every evening a series of loud musket reports is heard from the different villages along with the river. Every evening a series of loud musket reports is heard from the different villages along the river. These are imitation evening guns. All copy the Arabs in dress and chewing tobacco with Nora lime, made from burnt river shells instead of betel nut and lime. The women are stout, well-built persons with thick arms and legs, their heads inclined to the bullet shape. The lip rings are small, the tattoo a mixture of Makoa and Wayu. Fine blue and black beads are in fashion, and so are arm coils of thick brass wire. Very nicely inlaid combs are worn in the hair. The inlaying is accomplished by means of a gum got from the root of an orchis called nangzao. 3rd July, 1866. A short march brought us to Matarika's new place. The chief made his appearance only after he had ascertained all he could about us. The population is immense. They are making new gardens, and the land is laid out by straight lines about a foot broad, cut with the hoe. One goes miles without getting beyond the marked or surveyed fields. Matarika came at last, a big, ugly man with large mouth and receding forehead. He asked to see all our curiosities, as the watch, revolver, breech-loading rifle, sextant. I gave him a lecture on the evil of selling his people, and he wished me to tell all the other chiefs the same thing. They dislike the idea of guilt being attached to them for having sold many who have lost their lives on their way down to the sea-coast. We had a long visit from Matarika next day. He gave us a meal, and meat of wild hog, with a salad made of bean leaves. A wretched Swahili Arab, ill with rheumatism, came for aid and got a cloth. They all profess to me to be buying ivory only. 5th July, 1866. We left for Matende, who is the last chief before we enter on a good 8 days' march to Mataka's. We might have gone to Kandulo's, who is near the Rovuma, and more to the north, but all are so well supplied with everything by slave traders that we have difficulty in getting provisions at all. Mataka has plenty of all kinds of food. On the way, we passed the burnt bones of a person. Avo was accused of having eaten human flesh. He had been poisoned, or, as they said, killed by poison, mauve, and then burned. His clothes were hung up on trees by the wayside as a warning to others. The country was covered with scraggy forest, but so undulating that one could often see all round from the crest of the waves. Great mountain masses appear in the south and southwest. It feels cold, and the sky is often overcast. 6th July, 1866. I took lunars yesterday, after which Matende invited us to eat at his house, where he had provided a large mess of rice porridge and bean leaves as a relish. He says that many Arabs pass him, and many of them die in their journeys. He knows no deaf or dumb person in the country. He says that he cuts the throats of all animals to be eaten, and does not touch lion or hyena. 7th July, 1866. We got men from Matende to carry loads and show the way. He asked a cloth to ensure his people going to the journey's end and behaving properly. This is the only case of anything like tribute being demanded in this journey. I gave him a cloth worth 5s. 6d. Upland vegetation prevails. Trees are dotted here and there among bushes 5 feet high, and fine blue and yellow flowers are common. We pass over a succession of ridges and valleys as in Landa. Each valley has a running stream or trickling rill. Garden willows are in full bloom, and also a species of sage with variegated leaves beneath the flowers. When Sepoy Param threw away the tea in the lead lining, I only reproved him and promised him punishment if he committed any other willful offense. But now he and another skulked behind and gave their loads to a stranger to carry, with a promise to him that I would pay. We waited 2 hours for them, and as the Havildar said that they would not obey him, I gave Param and the other some smart cuts with a cane. But I felt that I was degrading myself, and resolved not to do the punishment myself again. 8th July, 1866. Hard traveling through a depopulated country. The trees are about the size of hop poles, with abundance of tall grass. The soil is sometimes a little sandy, at other times that reddish clayey sort which yields native grain so well. The rock seen uppermost is often a ferruginous conglomerate lying on granite rocks. The gum copal tree is here a mere bush, and no digging takes place for the gum. It is called mchenga and yields gum when wounded, as also bark, cloth, and cordage when stripped. Mountain masses are all around us. We sleep at Linata Mountain. 9th July, 1866. The masuko fruit abounds. The name is the same here as in the Batoka country. There are also rhododendrons of 2 species, but the flowers white. We slept in a wild spot near Mount Laziro, with many lions roaring about us. One horse fellow serenaded us a long time, but did nothing more. Game is said to be abundant, but we saw none, save an occasional diver springing away from the path. Some streams ran to the northwest to the Lismayando, which flows north for the Rovuma, others to the southeast for the Loendi. 10th and 11th July, 1866. Nothing to interest but the same weary trudge. Our food so scarce that we can only give a handful or half a pound of grain to each person per day. The masuko fruit is formed, but not ripe till rains begin. Very few birds are seen or heard, though there is both food and water in the many grain-bearing grasses and running streams, which we cross at the junction of every 2 ridges. A dead body lay in a hut by the wayside. The poor thing had begun to make a garden by the stream, probably in hopes of living long enough, 2 months or so, on wild fruits to reap a crop of maize. 12th July, 1866. A drizzling mist set in during the night and continued this morning. We set off in the dark, however, leaving our last food for the Havildar and sepoys who had not yet come up. The streams are now of a good size. An Arab brandy bottle was lying broken in one village called Masapa. We hurried on as fast as we could do to the Lutzi. our last stage before getting to Mataka's. This stream is rapid, about 40 yards wide, waist deep, with many pedostemons on the bottom. The country gets more and more undulating and is covered with masses of green foliage, chiefly masuko trees, which have large, hard leaves. There are hippopotami further down the river on its way to the Loiende. A little rice which had been kept for me I divided, but some did not taste food. 13th July, 1866. A good many stragglers behind, but we push on to get food and send it back to them. The soil all reddish clay, the roads baked hard by the sun, and the feet of many of us are weary and sore. A weary march and long, for it is perpetually up and down now. I counted 15 running streams in one day. They are at the bottom of the valley which separates the ridges. We got to the brow of a ridge about an hour from Mataka's first gardens, and all were so tired that we remained to sleep. But we first invited volunteers to go on and buy food and bring it back early next morning. They had to be pressed to do this duty. 14th July, 1866. As our volunteers did not come at 8 a.m., I set off to see the cause, and after an hour of perpetual up and down march, as I descended the steep slope which overlooks the first gardens, I saw my friends start up at the apparition. They were comfortably cooking porridge for themselves. I sent men of Mataka back with food to the stragglers behind and came on into his town. An Arab, Sef Rupia, or Rubia, head of a large body of slaves on his way to the coast, most kindly came forward and presented an ox, bag of flour, and some cooked meat, all of which were extremely welcome to the half-famished men, or indeed under any circumstances. He had heard of our want of food and of a band of sepoys, and what could the English think of doing but putting an end to the slave trade? Had he seen our wretched escort, all fear of them would have vanished. He had a large safari or caravan under him. This body is usually divided into 10 or 12 portions, and all are bound to obey the leader to a certain extent. In this case, there were 11 parties, and the traders numbered about 60 or 70, who were dark coast Arabs. Each underling had his men under him, and when I saw them, they were busy making the pens of branches in which their slaves and they sleep. Sef came on with me to Mataka's and introduced me in due form with the discharges of gunpowder. I asked him to come back next morning and presented 3 cloths with a request that he would assist the Havaladar and sepoys if he met them with food. This he generously did. We found Mataka's town situated in an elevated valley surrounded by mountains. The houses numbered at least 1,000, and there were many villages around. The mountains were pleasantly green and had many trees, which the people were incessantly cutting down. They had but recently come here. They were besieged by Mazatu at their former location west of this. After fighting 4 days, they left unconquered, having beaten the enemy off. Mataka kept us waiting some time in the veranda of his large square house, and then made his appearance, smiling with his good-natured face. He is about 60 years of age, dressed as an Arab, and if we may judge from the laughter with which his remarks were always greeted, somewhat humorous. He had never seen any but Arabs before. He gave me a square house to live in. Indeed, the most of the houses here are square, for the Arabs are imitated in everything. They have introduced the English pea, and we were pleased to see large patches of it in full bearing, and ripe in moist hollows which had been selected for it. The numerous springs which come out at various parts are all made use of. Those parts which are too wet are drained, whilst beds are regularly irrigated by watercourses and ridges. We had afterwards occasion to admire the very extensive draining which has been effected among the hills. Cassava is cultivated on ridges all along the streets in the town, which give it a somewhat regular and neat appearance. Peas and tobacco were the chief products raised by irrigation, but batatas and maize were often planted too. Wheat would succeed if introduced. The altitude is about 2,700 feet above the sea. The air at this time is cool, and many people have coughs. Mataka soon sent a good mess of porridge and cooked meat, beef. He has plenty of cattle and sheep, and the next day he sent abundance of milk. We stand a good day of staring unmoved, though it is often accompanied by remarks by no means complimentary. They think that they are not understood, and probably I do misunderstand sometimes. Though I do jumble their words as I think, and Mataka thought that I did not enunciate anything, but kept my tongue still when I spoke. The town of Matak, Moembe. 15th July, 1866. The safari under Seth set off this morning for Kilwa. Seth says that about 100 of the Kilwa people died this year, so slaving as well as philanthropy is accompanied with loss of life. We saw about 7 of their graves, the rest died on the road up. There are 2 roads from this to the lake, one to Losewa, which is west of this and opposite Kotakota. The other, Makatu, is further south. The first is 5 days through deserted country chiefly, but the other 7 among people and plenty of provisions all the way. It struck me after Seth had numbered up the losses that the Kilwa people sustained by death in their endeavors to enslave people, similar losses on the part of those who go to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to save and elevate need not be made so very much of as they sometimes are. Soon after our arrival, we heard that a number of Mataka's Wayu had, without his knowledge, gone to Nyassa, and in a foray carried off cattle and people. When they came home with the spoil, Mataka ordered all to be sent back whence they came. The chief came up to visit me soon after, and I told him that his decision was the best piece of news I had heard in the country. He was evidently pleased with my approbation, and turning to his people, asked if they heard what I said. He repeated my remark, and said, "You silly fellows think me wrong in returning the captives, but all wise men will approve of it." And he then scolded them roundly. I was accidentally spectator of this party going back, for on going out of the town I saw a meat market opened, and people buying with maize and meal. On inquiring, I was told that the people and cattle there were Nyassas, and they had slaughtered an ox in order to exchange meat for grain as provisions on the journey. The women and children numbered 54, and about a dozen boys were engaged in milking the cows. The cattle were from 25 to 30 head. The change from hard and scanty fare caused illness in several of our party. I tasted no animal food except what turtle doves and guinea fowls could be shot since we passed Matawata. True, a fowl was given by Matende. The last march was remarkable for the scarcity of birds, so 8 days were spent on porridge and rice without relish. I gave Mataka a trinket to be kept in remembrance of his having sent back the Nyassa people. He replied that he would always act in a similar manner. As it was a spontaneous act, it was all the more valuable. The sepoys have become quite intolerable, and if I cannot get rid of them, we shall all starve before we accomplish what we wish. They dawdle behind, picking up wild fruits, and over our last march, which we accomplished on the morning of the 8th day, they took from 14 to 22 days. Retaining their brutal feelings to the last, they killed the donkey which I lent to the Havildar to carry his things, by striking it on the head when in boggy places into which they had senselessly driven it loaded. Then the Havildar came on, his men pretending they could go no further from weakness, and killed the young buffalo and eat it when they thought they could hatch up a plausible story. They said it had died, and tigers came and devoured it. They saw them. "Did you see the stripes of the tiger?" said I. All declared that they saw the stripes distinctly. This gave us an idea of their truthfulness, for there is no striped tiger in all Africa. All who resolved on skulking or other bad behavior invariably took up with the sepoys. Their talk seemed to suit evildoers, and they were such a disreputable-looking lot that I was quite ashamed of them. The Havildar had no authority, and all bore the sulky, dogged look of people going where they were forced but hated to go. This hangdog expression of countenance was so conspicuous that I may a time have heard the country people remark, "These are the slaves of the party." They have neither spirit nor pluck as compared with the Africans, and if one saw a village, he turned out of the way to beg in the most abject manner, or lay down and slept, the only excuse afterwards being, "My legs were sore." Having allowed some of them to sleep at the fire in my house, they began a wholesale plunder of everything they could sell, as cartridges, cloths, and meat, so I had to eject them. One of them then threatened to shoot my interpreter Simon if he got him in a quiet place away from the English power. As this threat had been uttered 3 times, and I suspect that something of the kind had prevented the Havildar exerting his authority, I resolved to get rid of them by sending them back to the coast by the first trader. It is likely that some sympathizers will take their part, but I strove to make them useful. They had but poor and scanty fare in a part of the way, but all of us suffered alike. They made themselves thoroughly disliked by their foul talk and abuse, and if everything tended more than another to show me that theirs was a moral unfitness for travel, it was the briskness assumed when they knew they were going back to the coast. I felt inclined to force them on, but it would have been acting from revenge, and to pay them out, so I forbore. I gave Mitaka 48 yards of calico, and to the sepoys 18 yards, and arranged that he should give them food till Suleiman, a respective trader, should arrive. He was expected every day, and we passed him near the town. If they chose to go and get their luggage, it was, of course, all safe for them behind. The havildar begged still to go on with me, and I consented, though he is a drag on the party, but he will count in any difficulty. Abraham recognized his uncle among the crowds who came to see us. On making himself known, he found that his mother and 2 sisters had been sold to the Arabs after he had been enslaved. The uncle pressed him to remain, and Mitaka urged, and so did another uncle, but in vain. I added my voice, and could have given him goods to keep him afloat a good while, but he invariably replied, "How can I stop where I have no mother and no sister?" The affection seems to go to the maternal side. I suggested that he might come after he had married a wife, but I fear very much that unless some European would settle, none of these Nassik boys will come to this country. It would be decidedly better if they were taught agriculture in the simplest form, as the Indian. Mitaka would have liked to put his oxen to use, but Abraham could not help him with that. He is a smith, or rather a nothing, for unless he could smelt iron, he would be entirely without materials to work with. 14th through 28th July, 1866. One day, calling at Mitaka's, I found, as usual, a large crowd of idlers, who always respond with a laugh to everything he utters as wit. He asked, if he went to Bombay, what ought he take to secure some gold? I replied, ivory. He rejoined, would slaves not be a good speculation? I replied that if he took slaves there for sale, they would put him in prison. The idea of the great Mitaka in Choki made him wince, and the laugh turned for once against him. He said that as all people from the coast crowd to him, they ought to give him something handsome for being here to supply their wants. I replied if he would fill the fine, well-watered country we had passed over with people, instead of sending them off to Kilwa, he would confer a benefit on visitors, but we had been starved on the way to him, and I then told him what the English would do in road-making in a fine country like this. This led to talk of railways, ships, plowing with oxen. The last idea struck him most. I told him that I should have liked some of the Nassik boys to remain and teach this and other things, but they might be afraid to venture lest they should be sold again. The men who listened never heard such decided protests against selling each other into slavery before. The idea of guilt probably floated but vaguely in their minds, but the loss of life we have witnessed, in the guilt of which the sellers as well as the buyers participate, comes home very forcibly to their minds. Mitaka has been an active hand in slave wars himself, though now he wishes to settle down in quiet. The Waiau generally are still the most active agents the slave traders have. The caravan leaders from Kilwa arrive at a Waiau village, show the goods they have brought, are treated liberally by the elders, and told to wait and enjoy themselves. Slaves enough to purchase all will be procured. Then a foray is made against the Manganja, who have few or no guns. The Waiau who come against them are abundantly supplied with both by their coast guests. Several of the low-coast Arabs, who differ in nothing from the Waiau, usually accompany the foray and do business on their own account. This is the usual way in which a safari is furnished with slaves. Makangela, a Waiau chief about a third of the way from Atendes to Mitaka, has lost the friendship of all his neighbors by kidnapping and selling their people. If any of Mitaka's people are found in the district between Makangela and Moembe, they are considered fair game and sold. Makangela's people cannot pass Mitaka to go to the Manganja, so they do what they can by kidnapping and plundering all who fall into their hands. When I employed 2 of Mitaka's people to go back on the 14th with food to the havildar and sepoys, they went a little way and relieved some, but would not venture as far as the Lawatsi, for fear of losing their liberty by Makangela's people. I could not get the people of the country to go back, nor could I ask the Nassik boys, who had been threatened by the sepoys with assassination. And it was the same with the Johanna men, because, though Mahometans, the sepoys had called them Kafirs, etc., and they all declared, "We are ready to do anything for you, but we will do nothing for these Hindis." I sent back a sepoy, giving him provisions. He sat down in the first village, ate all the food, and returned. An immense tract of country lies uninhabited. To the northeast of Moembe, We have at least 50 miles of as fine land as can be seen anywhere, still bearing all the marks of having once supported a prodigious iron smelting and grain growing population. The clay pipes which are put on the nozzles of their bellows and inserted into the furnace are met with everywhere, often vitrified. Then the ridges on which they planted maize, beans, cassava, and sorghum, and which they find necessary to drain off the too abundant moisture of the rains, still remain unleveled to attest the industry of the former inhabitants. The soil, being clayey, resists for a long time the influence of the weather. These ridges are very regular, for in crossing the old fields, as the path often compels us to do, one foot treads regularly on the ridge and the other in the hollow for a considerable distance. Pieces of broken pots, with their rims ornamented with very good imitations of basket work, attest that the lady potters of old followed the example given them by their still more ancient mothers. Their designs are rude, but better than we can make them without referring to the original. No want of water has here acted to drive the people away, as has been the case further south. It is a perpetual succession of ridge and valley, with a running stream or oozing bog, where ridge is separated from ridge. The ridges become steeper and narrower as we approach Matakas. I counted 15 running burns of from 1 to 10 yards wide in one day's march of about 6 hours. Being in a hilly or rather mountainous region, they flow rapidly and have plenty of water power. In July, any mere torrent ceases to flow, but these were brawling burns with water too cold, 61 degrees, for us to bathe in, whose pores were all opened by the relaxing regions nearer the coast. The sound, so un-African, of gushing water dashing over rocks was quite familiar to our ears. This district, which rises up west of Matakas to 3,400 feet above the sea, catches a great deal of the moisture brought up by the easterly winds. Many of the trees are covered with lichens. While here we had cold southerly breezes, and a sky so overcast every day after 10 a.m. that we could take no astronomical observations. Even the latitude was too poor to be much depended on. 12 degrees, 53 minutes south may have been a few miles from this. The cattle, rather a small breed, black and white in patches, and brown with humps, give milk which is duly prized by these Wayuu. The sheep are the large-tailed variety and generally of a black color. Fowls and pigeons are the only other domestic animals we see, if we except the wretched village dogs which our poodle had immense delight in chasing. The Wayuu are far from a handsome race, but they are not the prothagnous beings one sees on the west coast either. Their heads are of a round shape, compact foreheads but not particularly receding. The alienae are flattened out, lips full. With the women, a small lip ring just turns them up to give additional thickness. Their style of beauty is exactly that which was in fashion when the stone deities were made in the caves of Elephanta and Kenora near Bombay. A favorite mode of dressing the hair into little knobs, which was in fashion there, is more common in some tribes than this. The mouths of the women would not be so hideous with a small lip ring if they did not file their teeth to points, but they seem strong and able for the work which falls to their lot. The men are large, strong-boned fellows and capable of enduring great fatigue. They undergo a rite which once distinguished the Jews about the age of puberty, and take a new name on the occasion. This was not introduced by the Arabs, whose advent is a recent event, and they speak of the time before they were inundated with European manufactures in exchange for slaves, as quite within their memory. Young Mutaka gave me a dish of peas, and usually brought something every time he made a visit. He seems a nice boy, and his father, in speaking of learning to read, said he and his companions could learn, but he himself was too old. The soil seems very fertile, for the sweet potatoes become very large, and we brought 2 loads of them for 3 cubits and 2 needles. They quite exceeded 1 cwt. The maize becomes very large too. 1 cob had 1,600 seeds. The abundance of water, the richness of soil, the available labor for building square houses, the coolness of the climate, make this nearly as desirable as a residence as Magomero. But alas, instead of 3 weeks' easy sail up the Zambezi and Shire, we have spent 4 weary months in getting here. I shall never cease bitterly to lament the abandonment of the Magomero mission. Moaning seems a favorite way of spending the time with some sick folk. For the sake of the warmth, I allowed a Nassik boy to sleep in my house. He and I had the same complaint, dysentery, and I was certainly worse than he, but did not moan, while he played at it as often as he was awake. I told him that people who moaned only when too ill to be sensible of what they were doing. The groaning ceased, though he became worse. 3 sepoys played at groaning very vigorously outside my door. They had nothing the matter with them, except perhaps fatigue, which we all felt alike. As these fellows prevented my sleeping, I told them quite civilly that if so ill that they required to groan, they had better move off a little way, as I could not sleep. They preferred the veranda and at once forbore. The abundance of grain and other food is accompanied by great numbers of rats or large mice, which play all manner of pranks by night. White ants have always to be guarded against likewise. Anyone who would find an antidote to drive them away would confer a blessing. The natural check is the driver ant, which when it visits a house is a great pest for a time, but it clears the others out. End of chapter 3.